Practically speaking, you got somebody who's 25 and has an entry-level job. They got the job. They have the job. Now what? Thank you for checking out Real Talk Personal Finance. Shit's about to get real. Cash Flow King with you today. And in today's show, we have a very special repeat guest, premium subscriber.
Premium!
Please welcome back to the show to talk to us about lessons learned from the older worker, Equity Stacker.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So it's been a while since you've been back, or since you've been on the show, I should say. I think your initial episode, we talked about mortgages, and that's how you got the name Equity Stacker, right?
Yeah.
Today, we're gonna shift gears and change directions a little bit and talk about lessons learned from the older worker in the workforce. So, young people, listen up. All right, what do you got?
Well, I think people are living longer today, and, they talk about, when I say they, I mean the government and the politicians talk about extending the year that younger workers can collect Social Security benefits. But I'm a baby boomer, and I see a lot of older workers losing their jobs and before their full retirement age and not being able to fill that gap, and I think for the younger worker, they could learn from us. I'm still gainfully employed, but I am preparing for probably a partial retirement where I can have a flexible work-life balance. I'll still work, but not as many hours. So there's just a lot that I think I've observed from my circle. I have friends that have already retired. I have a friend that was laid off at 60, I believe, or 62. He happened to save a lot of money, and when unemployment ran out, he could tap into his retirement portfolio before collecting Social Security. But these are life events that you don't always anticipate. Healthcare costs are rising, even for the older worker. And, all that long-term financial planning that you're well aware of and an expert in, people don't think about. We don't think about it sometimes until it's too late. So I think the younger generation can listen and learn.
All right, so let's go to that example. Early 60s, somebody loses a position. Is this an isolated instance? Is this hey, they got rid of a bunch of people right around the same age that are, quote unquote pre-retirees? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened, the latter. There was a financial institution that had a midnight shift, third shift group of people that they worked in IT, and they were all in their 60s with the exception of one who I think was in his 40s, and they were able to retain, believe it or not. So the company sold this particular function to another company, and the employees were not displaced, but they were acquired by this other company and given retention bonuses that would be paid out 12 months from the acquisition. And 3 months following the payment, they were told they were going to lose their jobs, and they did. Except for the one that was in his 40s. I think the former financial institution was able to find a position for him. But there were at least 4 or 5 individuals that were in their early 60s. I think one of them might have been close to 70, but that person was, just wanting to work forever. And nothing wrong with that. There are people that want to work for many reasons. And so, yeah, the company let them go. So they were all in their early 60s, except one gentleman was in his 70s or close to 70, and the other was in his 40s that was able to transfer back to the former financial institution. So I can tell you, actually, one of them was diagnosed with cancer. Another one, had saved a good amount in their retirement portfolio. And the other one was like already 65 and ready to retire, so he just moved into retirement. But when you think about it, you don't expect it. You think you're going to stay somewhere, you're at the end of your career, and anything can happen. So you have to plan. And the person that was diagnosed with cancer, obviously is incurring all kinds of medical expenses that were not anticipated. The one that was ready for retirement is doing okay. And the one that wasn't ready to retire but has the means to survive was only able to collect unemployment for a short period of time. And, the work that they do is not easy to find a job in. It's not the most advanced technology that they used, but it just goes to show you, some of them could have been out in the street had they not either been close to retiring, maybe the one that got sick has medical insurance and hopefully can get some help, and then the one that planned appropriately is living off their retirement portfolio right now to survive. So these are things that the younger generation has to think about. It's not like it was, you're going to stay with the company. There's no loyalty out there, as we know. So you got to plan because life happens.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that, there's a lot of YouTube videos out there. I've seen some of them that you have these people that are these older people that are making YouTube channels, and they are in their 60s or even 70s. And I think there was one lady I don't know if she was in her 80s or what, but she was significantly older. And they're driving for, Uber and DoorDash and whatever they can to scrape together whatever they can, not because they feel like working, but because they literally need the money and the cash to be able to survive. And so it's a real thing. I remember, and I might have mentioned this on the show before, there was a networking group I was part of years ago, and there was a gentleman who basically was like, hey, on payday, you and the company are even. You have no equity. You have, they don't owe you anything. You don't owe them anything. It's pretty much like you're starting over. So even if you've been somewhere for decades, it doesn't necessarily mean that the company's going to take care of you forever like they used to a lot of times way back in the day. So your point in the lesson for the younger workers is what? You need to be financially prepared for the unexpected?
Yes, and you also need to have a side gig because although they say AI, my personal opinion and my professional opinion as well is AI will eliminate a lot of entry-level customer service type roles. Now, that's my opinion. And I think that what AI can't do is apply good judgment skills and soft skills and everything that a lot of older workers, believe it or not, have. Not saying younger workers don't have it, but they say experience never gets old. It comes with experience. And I tell the young people in my life today, get a side gig. And I'll give you an example. One of them does have like a photography business on the side. Another one has a skincare product position on the side because you just never know when you might be impacted by a job loss. And to have a side gig, not saying, it could be your own business. It could just be, keeping your skills up to par and, find your passion and have that to fall back on because you're right. When you get your pay, you did your time and your paycheck is earned. Loyalty is, years ago growing up, people could go get a job at an electric company or a telephone company and have a pension and know that they had job security for 30, 40 years. Those days are long gone.
So do you think that, and I would make an argument that I agree with what you said, but I would argue in general, not with your point, but this whole idea of financial independence or FI is a real thing, even if you never actually choose to use it or need to use it. So for those that might be new to the show or new to the concept of financial independence, it's pretty much the best phrase I can use to describe it is becoming work optional and getting to a point where you have either income sources and or investments that you can draw down from, etc., so that you have the ability to choose whether or not you want to work, and you don't necessarily have to work for a paycheck. And there's varying levels of that, and that's beyond the scope of today's show. I'm not going to get into all that, but there is some power, I think, that comes with that. Even if that individual attains a level of financial independence and then still chooses to work into their later years, that's fine. But if they find themselves in a position where they're shown the door before they were ready and it's not their choice, they do, like the person in your example, have something to fall back on to help get them through. So I would make an argument, or not an argument, but I would, I guess, supplement what your point is, which is have alternate streams of income with taking those and doing something with it such that you're setting yourself up to be in a position of financial strength, so that if and when shit hits the fan, you have options.
Absolutely. I can remember maybe 12, 15 years ago, I decided to leave my job because they were restructuring and the way the chips fell wasn't satisfactory to me. And I thought, I'm not going to stay in this toxic environment. I'm going to leave, which is a huge risk. I don't advise it. It's always easier to find a new job when you are gainfully employed. But I was able to negotiate and, get a little bit of severance and unemployment. But, that runs out. I did have a savings, and it got to a point where I was 50-something years old and highly skilled in my craft, but found it difficult to secure a job because they could hire somebody, companies could hire somebody half my age and at half my salary. And that's, believe it or not, when I first experienced the real age bias out there in the world, and it is real. But because I had a little bit of a savings, I was able to pay the mortgage. I was able to pay the bills. It did dwindle my savings because I think I was out of work for a period of close to 9 months. It wasn't a good time in the market, and quite frankly, I was seen as a liability versus an investment. And a lot of companies view the older worker as a liability, which is a shame, because we have so much. And I will say to the older workers out there that are listening, don't give up. If you are unemployed or laid off or want to stay in the workforce longer, just keep at it, because there are companies that are age friendly and it will give you that opportunity. And I do think, speaking of opportunity, that the AI tools that companies are starting to implement will open up doors for the older worker because of their wisdom, because of their experience, because of their knowledge, because of their judgment and logic. A machine cannot produce any of the above, but the older worker can. And so I think it's going to open doors for them. I also think there are opportunities in the workplace for reverse mentoring, where younger workers can show some of their older counterparts how to maybe become a little bit more tech savvy, and likewise the older worker can show the younger generation how to problem solve, how to be patient, how to apply judgment and logic. Sometimes those things are innate, and sometimes you can learn by mentoring somebody, or somebody can learn from you mentoring them.
All right, so I've heard a few different things about this AI. Let's talk about this AI for a second here. So one of the things you mentioned a little while ago was that AI has the potential to eliminate essentially entry-level type positions like customer service jobs. And then what I thought you were going to say, you started to say, was how AI can actually be complementary to some of the older workers and the skill sets that they have and that they've developed over time with experience. And then I was going to ask you, well, does that mean that tough shit for the younger workers? But then you mentioned the mentorship thing. So, like, in the grand scheme of things, overall, moving forward, you have older workers that may not want to or be ready to retire. You have younger workers that are trying to get in the workforce. You have AI that is doing all kinds of things, and people have their own opinions about that, but ideally making things more efficient. And then you have this, inflationary issue or pressure that's been there for, in recent years. When you put all that in a blender, like what happens? What's the outcome from that? Does it mean that there's more jobs, fewer jobs, more jobs for one section as far as age versus the other? Like, how does this, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but how do you imagine this plays out over the coming years?
Well, so lots of what they call white collar entry level jobs like customer service, etc., they're going to be obsolete because of AI. We see it now. You can call a customer service of any organization and you're getting a recording. You're getting somebody that can pretty much do what a human used to do. So those types of jobs are already obsolete and will continue to become obsolete, in my opinion. I think AI is great. I do. I'm not against AI, but I think people have to not be afraid of it, but embrace it. I embrace it, but I see the line of work that I'm in, and I tell the younger workers, they're going to need fewer of us. So you better have a backup gig, or you better think about, another path. Not that you need to leave the current path, but just think about how to build a secure future for you in terms of long-term employment. But machines cannot replace judgment or soft skills or wisdom, okay? You can leverage AI in the workplace, so I'm not against it. I think it's great, but I think we have to be real here. I think we have to, these jobs or functions of jobs that AI tools can take over are going to allow companies to hire fewer people for those full-time roles because AI can probably do 50% of the job. Now,
maybe, but let me push back here for a minute, though. All right, so I've had the call this time of the year. A lot of people are using their benefits at work. They're going to renew or run out, and we're getting ready to enter into the next calendar year. We're recording this at the end of 2025. And so, usually at the end of the year, I do a lot of medical appointments and stuff. And, I had my vision checked recently, and I was in the process of getting eyeglasses for my nighttime driving. And I've had to deal with, normally I would just get my exam and I would go to the retail shop, if you will, in the optometrist office, and I would get my glasses there. And quite frankly, I may go back to doing that at some point. But I thought, you know what, let me try to go online. Let me be efficient. Let me save some money. Let me try to, whatever. And so I had not the greatest experience, and I'll keep this rather brief, with a couple of different retailers online for prescription eyeglasses. And when I had to call in customer service, and with one particular place I had to call in multiple times, they can try to do whatever with the automated AI and whatever bullshit on the front end. But when you have somebody like me that's pissed off and starts screaming representative, 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 I want to talk to a person. Right. And eventually I got to. So I would push back a little bit and say that, yes, there might be some truth to that, but I also believe that there's still going to be some base level, and maybe that's why you said 50%, but there's going to be some baseline of human interaction that people want, that people need, and that AI can't fully replace. Would you agree with that, or do you think I'm way off there?
I absolutely agree with you. But companies are going to need fewer full-time people in certain functions because AI can do the job. Up to the point where the human skills are needed, where you need to talk to somebody, you need to assess, you need to do assessments or apply wisdom. Absolutely. But, how long did it take you to get a live agent before you had to go through so many prompts with the recording?
Way too long, unfortunately. But once I had the prompts memorized, because after talking to the agent, and knowing what I had to press to get there, it happened rather quickly on the subsequent phone calls, which unfortunately there had to be subsequent phone calls. But and maybe that's a one-off example, and maybe that's not necessarily going to be the case anywhere. But I mean, I've called several different organizations this month just trying to get things tidied up, and more often than not, it's not just one single phone call anymore. And I think that's, and maybe I'm going off on a tangent here, but I think that's part of the problem. And I don't know if this is specifically an AI issue or not, but it's like companies want to be more and more efficient, right? It's like, yeah, thank you for calling blah, blah, blah. Did you know that you can go to our website at www.gofuckyourself because we don't want to talk to you.com, and you can resolve this on your own. They don't want to talk to people. They don't want to have to employ people, to your point, to talk to people. But sometimes they can't always get things done to the satisfaction of the customer. And so what happens is, I would argue that it creates even more of a mess and more of an increased cost and more of a callback rate where they have to call in multiple times and exhaust resources. And now you're trying to do all that with fewer people. And I think ultimately, and I'm not against AI by any means, but I think ultimately it leads to, in a lot of cases, a not so great customer experience. And maybe that's just recency bias on my part because I've had to deal with that, in the past few weeks. But I don't think I'm alone there. I don't know.
No, and I just think over time, AI will be refined and there'll be, a lessons learned with AI. I mean, we're still in the thick of it. So to your point, I mean, companies that may lose profits or customers, they'll have to refine that, but we'll have to wait and see. I don't think AI is going away, so we have to embrace it
All right.
and
So
see how
what?
see how see where it lands. But it's not going away. It's here to stay. I'm sorry to say.
All right, so let's pivot for a second, and let's just say, all right, I'm a listener. I am in my early to mid 20s. I finished my 4-year degree. Let's say I got a bachelor's degree in whatever business, and I'm ready to go out there into the workforce and show them my stuff. And I'm young, and I don't have a lot of experience. And fortunately, I'm able to find some white collar position where AI hasn't completely dominated and taken over. And like what you mentioned about like building alternate paths or seeing alternate paths, what would you say to the younger worker who is entering into the workforce and they come out with a degree, they've done quote unquote all the right things, now they're into and entering into the workforce in a particular field? What do they need to focus on, A, for the field that they're in terms of mentorship and older workers and experience and making yourself valuable in the workplace and all that shit? And then B, how do they go about thinking like, oh, well, what else should I be doing in case this doesn't work out?
Well, first of all, you don't need a degree today to get, a job. But if you have a degree, that's great. But things are shifting again to, do you really need a degree to do this job? Are you trainable? I would say LinkedIn, you have to have a LinkedIn profile. LinkedIn is the way that recruiters find candidates. So it's building a professional profile. It's posting either posting or following posts and companies that you're interested in, linking with people on LinkedIn that that work at a company that you want to perhaps explore opportunities with, seek out mentorships, talk to family and friends. It's very, very challenging out there, but I will say you can't just walk into a company and drop off your resume. I had somebody ask me that recently because her son is unemployed and can't find a job, not even during the holiday seasonal time, and she told him, why don't you just go and drop off a resume at a company? And he's like, Mom, they don't do that anymore. And I told her, I said, friend, they don't do that anymore. And it's all about networking. But LinkedIn is probably the most utilized by recruiters. So that's number one. Make sure you have a LinkedIn profile.
But this is to get the job is what you're talking about right now, right?
Recruiters are utilizing LinkedIn as probably one of the top sources. So if you're looking for a job, you better be on LinkedIn, and you better have your clean profile and your clean posts, and make sure that you follow or tag different articles, because that's how they find you. Make sure you're open to work.
Understood. But my question is that, let's say the person has already done that. They now have the job. My question is, what do they need to do to make themselves more valuable while also having one foot out the door, trying to look for or build that second income stream or that side hustle or some of the things that you mentioned before? I'm just like, practically speaking, you got somebody who's 25 and has an entry-level job. They got the job. They have the job. Now what?
Find your passion, guys. Find your passion. No one should go to a job every day that they don't like. And I know a lot of people that go to work with jobs that stress them out, and they're there for 30, 40 years. Find your passion. I don't know what people's passions are. They have to do some just look inward and find out, what are your hobbies? What are your passions? Do you like to play cards? Do you want to get a part-time job at a casino? Do you like photography? Do you want to set up your own website and do weddings and graduations and things like that? Find your passion and build a little business on the side for yourself.
Okay, so the passion-led comment is for the side hustle. So you find the main job, you're doing your thing at the main job, and then to create the additional income stream / side hustle / if this corporate thing doesn't work out, what am I going to do? That stems from what you're passionate about. Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Okay.
You got to love what you do.
I would agree with that to some degree, but I would also say that everybody has bills at the same time. So sometimes to push back, and I'm not trying to push back on everything, but I think that's part of what creates a good podcast is to hear multiple perspectives. But I think that sometimes you got to go where the money is. Yeah, you don't want some soul-sucking job where you're going to be absolutely miserable, but if you're passionate about thing A, but thing B is going to pay your bills, then maybe that's where you go to thing B to pay your bills, but you do thing A on the side, and eventually that could possibly take over, starting as a side hustle and turning into something else. But I don't know. I just think there's too much advice out there for people to like follow your heart, follow your passion, and like somebody goes and they, major in like art history or something, and then they wonder why they can't get a job, and they're doing something where they're not making a lot of money. I don't know.
Well, there's volunteer opportunities, and sometimes volunteer opportunities lead to jobs. So if somebody loves art or history and they go and say, I'll volunteer, at the school or the library, sometimes, it's all through, it's through networking. It's it doesn't mean you can't follow your passion. I agree with you. If you got to take a side job at McDonald's, but you still love art and history and you're volunteering at the library or the school, so be it. You got to be happy. I think the younger generation needs to prepare for late career layoffs. I think they need to build a financial buffer during those career transitions, even midlife. It's not just younger generations listening to this, it's even people in midlife, because it happens to the best of us when we least expect it. And then one of the things I want to do is just kind of build a flexible work-life balance. Like I said, I'm nearing retirement, but I'm not quite there yet. But I don't want to work 40 hours in the next couple of years. I want to scale back, but I still need to work. I still need to pay the bills. But I'm not ready to file for Social Security just yet. So I'm always strategizing in my mind, how can I make that plan a reality? So, and I'll tell you, the time that I was out of work, living on my savings, I had so many missed years because I took a lot of contract roles that eventually landed to full-time jobs with benefits. But when I was contracting, I wasn't able to contribute to an employer's 403B or 401k plan. Yeah, did I have an opportunity to catch up in later years? It was there, but I didn't have the means, or I decided, I need to put the money elsewhere. I can't play all this catch up. So, these are things that I look back and I say, wow, maybe I should have, did a catch up with my contributions, or maybe I should have figured out some other way to save. But in the moment, you're just looking to pay the next bill when you are in between jobs. So,
and I think a lot of people are dealing with that right now, even those that have a job, and in a lot of cases, those that have multiple jobs. I mean, that's the number one thing that I see and I hear, people that are like, hey, they're working 2 or 3 jobs just to get by. There was somebody, it was a YouTube clip on this particular channel, and this one guy was making an argument that like $10,000 a month just isn't enough. And people were blowing up in the comments, and there was somebody else that was doing the YouTube video. There's a lot of people that get out there and they have these channels where they put up these clips of other people's like shorts or videos or TikToks or whatever, and they comment on them and they read the comments and whatever. And the one dude that was like hosting, his own channel talking about this was like, hey, like $10,000 a month. I forget exactly how he put it. He's like, I'm chilling. Like, I'm good. Like, how the hell do you not live on that? And I think there's just such a wild spectrum of expectations, and then also just where people put their priorities. And so I guess I'm going to put a little quote unquote non-advice out there to all the listeners now. And I think that one of the biggest things that somebody can do is focusing on their fixed longer term or even midterm expenses. If you are going to purchase something, and this happens all the time with vehicles, it happens all the time with housing and homes, where people commit to these overly large monthly obligations relative to their income, that it doesn't leave a lot of room for them in other parts of their life. And so when groceries are sky high and eating out costs more and more, and inflation in other areas become more of an issue for them, it becomes harder and harder because they already have these otherwise large obligations. And so people that have listened to the show for a while have probably heard me say, I'm a big believer in balance. You have to plan for the future. You also have to enjoy your life today. But I truly feel that it's becoming harder and harder for people to do that. And I talk about this with people in my circle, I feel like almost every day, because I look at it and I'm like, I don't know how the average person does it. Like, I know what my situation is, and I'm very fortunate, and I have a great career, and I make good money and all that. But I look at like the average folks, typically dual income households, maybe they got a kid or two or more, and it's like, I don't see how they're making it. I really don't, because things have gotten so expensive. But what it all comes down to, I think, in a lot of cases is, well, that person or those people, they bought too much house, they bought too much car, they took on too big of a student loan with a large, payment obligation or whatever. And I think that the less you can commit to mid to long-term large expenses proportional to your income, the more control you will have, the more flexibility ultimately you will have over things in life as they get expensive. Yes, if going out to eat becomes more expensive, I can choose not to go out to eat that much, right? And I can scale that back. But what I can't do, I guess I could, but like if I go out and buy a car that's too much car and my payment relative to my income is unreasonable, unless I get rid of the car, I'm stuck with the payment for the duration of that loan. Or same thing with a house and a mortgage and so on. And so I just advice to the listeners, I think a lot of people don't think about those things in the here and now, and how that could, it might be okay at this particular moment. You might be stretching just a little bit in this particular moment, but then if things don't go according to plan, there is a downturn in the economy, something happens with your job, your income fluctuates downward, whatever the case is, it becomes harder and harder. And I think a lot of people are experiencing that right now. I saw a statistic recently, I don't remember the exact number, but it was a very high percentage of car loan payments today, it was well above 50%, are over $1,000 a month. Most people that are driving those cars with those payments do not have incomes high enough to reasonably support that as the percentage of their income, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. It's the economy. We're just going through some challenging times right now. I would think, the more you can, when I say you, I'm talking about the audience that is still gainfully employed and contributing to their company's retirement plan, the more you can save, the better. I had a friend tell me years ago, I always put the maximum, I don't know if it was 15% or whatever the heck she was putting in her, and this is a true story. She was putting money away, and I thought, man, I'm only putting like 3%, 4%. Every time I get a raise, maybe I'll put an extra 1%. But she was putting, 15%, and the company was matching, half of that or whatever. And it turns out that when she was probably 60, she's 70 now, but when she was 60, so 10 years ago, she was working in such a toxic environment, and she endured that for years to the point where it affected her health. And that's when you have to make a decision. But often what precludes us from making that decision is our finances, right? We're in a job that's causing high blood pressure, stress, mental health issues, whatever. And she had to make a decision. And luckily, she had saved enough that she was able to, at 60, and I know she planned to work till at least 65, she was able to leave her job. And I don't think she went for unemployment or anything like that. I can't recall. But she voluntarily left because of the toxicity. But, she was in a position where, and I used to think, maybe if I had, in hindsight, maybe if I had not gone out as much with my friends, or maybe, going to restaurants or whatever it was, maybe tightened my belt a little bit more, maybe I could have put 10% or 15%. And now you don't realize it till you're close to retirement, like what you could have, should have done. And so if you're in a position, and a lot of people are not, to your earlier points, they're trying to put food on the table, they're trying to, take care of their children and their families and their pets and their cars and their houses. But if you can put, think about how much can you put, and there's many ways to invest. It doesn't have to be just through a company plan, but you do get the match, and that's free dollars. But if you can afford to put more than 3 or 4%, and you can put the max, think about doing it, because that money's going to compound, and one day you're going to look back and be glad that you did.
Yeah, it's called FU money. For the Rated G shows out there, it's Fun Unlimited. For the Real Talk Personal Finance podcast, there's a concept in the FI community called FU money, which stands for Fuck You money. And that is basically what your friend had. And, for whatever reason, if she decides to walk away, which it sounds like she did, then she can. And that's what I mean when I talk about financial independence. It's not, somebody said to me one time, I forget exactly how they phrased it, but they said something to the effect of, they made a comment about how money was important to me, or that, it was about the money, or it was, something about the money. And I said, no, it's never about the money, which is true. It's never about the money. It's about what the money can do for you and the freedom that it can provide you, which is exactly what you just described. And I think that, that's something that we all aspire to in varying degrees. And FU money doesn't have to be, in her case, it sounds like it was permanent. She put a bunch of money into her retirement account. She was a few years away. She accumulated whatever she had, and she was able to step away, presumably forever. Now, for other people, if you're in your 20s, you're probably not going to be able to do that right away, but you might be able to put away even a few months or a year or a couple of years of expenses, to where if you're in that same type of toxic environment, you might not be retiring forever, but you have the flexibility and the freedom to be able to go and pivot and transition into something else. And I think that's super important. It's just really, really hard for a lot of people today, because I think there's this growing disparity between, the whole haves and the have-nots, and the people that are trying to put food on the table, and then the people that are trying to optimize and save every penny. And there usually isn't a ton in between, in a lot of opinions, including my own. But if you can do that, yeah, absolutely, I agree that people should.
Well, I think people need to think about what are their expectations too in retirement. Like for me, I'm thinking about it, but I know people in my life that are close to it, and we just, I have a friend that was helping her parents. They're from another country, so English is their second language, but she was helping them enroll in Social Security and, health insurance, and, learning about all these A, B, C's and D's of Social Security, Medicare, drug insurance, secondary supplementary. When you look at, the expenses of those secondary insurances and the drugs, I mean, that alone is like a aha moment. At least it is for me, where I'm like, wow. And I don't even have long-term health care planning. A lot of people, I think my friend had that, the one that was saving 15% a month. She was also investing in, she had a financial advisor, and she was, purchasing long-term health insurance. But like that whole thing, I can't even think about that, because it's like, what I think the younger people need to think about too is lessons learned from the older worker, where you don't realize, you think you're going to retire at a certain age and you're going to have a certain lifestyle, but you don't. Some people don't need that much when they retire. Others may want to have, equal to what they have currently before they retire, and others are like, you know what, I can do without this, or I can do without that. But what they don't think about sometimes is the healthcare costs and the long-term care insurance costs. And maybe you want to speak about that a little bit, like not give a whole lesson in it, but just like how to, that is a huge cost. That when you think of your total income as a retiree, how much of it is going on health insurance?
So there's a couple things there, and I'll try not to make this a boring lecture, so I'll just hit a few highlights, but it is a very important topic. Everyone's a little bit different, but there's some studies out there, and the most recent one that came back shows that on average, somebody spends roughly, and this is going to vary widely for different people, but somebody that is on Medicare, original Medicare, they're going to spend roughly $4,500 a year. So if you have a married couple, generally speaking, you double that to $9,000 per year. And that's going to be from everything from your Medicare Part B premiums to your Medicare supplement to your prescription drug costs, you name it. That is not by any means an all-inclusive number, but that's about what it shakes out to be, for the average individual as of the most recent study that we've seen. Now, there's medical or health-related things like that, right? And then there's also, you mentioned long-term care a couple times, which is very different. And in general, again, I'm not going to make this a huge long lecture, but in general, Medicare is not going to pay for extended periods of time for what we would consider to be custodial care for long-term care things. So, typically it's 2 out of 6 activities of daily living, things like eating, bathing, drinking, transferring, toileting, continence. Like if you can't do at least 2 of the 6 for a period of 90 days or more, normally that's going to be a triggering clause on a lot of types of long-term care solutions out there. That is not included in the estimate that I just gave you. That's not something that's typically covered by Medicare for an extended period of time. And that is where, and we could probably do a whole separate show on this, that is where there are different types of solutions out there for people to consider if that's something that they want to have addressed. And I'll give a quick example. There's a client of mine who retired relatively recently. She's taking some time off. She is planning on going back to work in 2026, at least part-time. And she's doing okay, and we ran her numbers and went through her plan and everything. And her plan is solid even after we stress tested it, unless she has some sort of chronic illness or long-term care type of event. And if that were to be the case, she has a potential shortfall where she could bleed her resources dry and potentially run out of money. So in her particular case, we were able to, and I won't go through excruciating detail, but we recently set her up with a long-term care solution. We're doing it essentially paid up in 10 years, we called it 10 pay, where she's going to pay premiums for 10 years and then she's done forever. And it provides her with, in her particular case, she's going to get, if she ever were to need care and go on claim, the way that we set it up is going to be initial 2 years of coverage with a 4-year extension of benefits rider. She'll have a total of 6 years, which is more than most people need, of coverage to help her pay for certain types of long-term care related expenses should she incur them that are not typically going to be covered long-term by medical insurance. But that's something that she has to plan for. That's something that she has to budget for. That's something that she's now going to have to pay for. And it's going to be different for everybody. So for those of you out there in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, probably don't need to worry too much about that. Anybody, once you cross the 50 mark, 50 to 60-ish age range, is really when we typically start talking to people about it in their 50s. I'd say 55 is probably the sweet spot, but realistically anywhere from, once you get a little bit older, sometimes it's harder and harder, but 50 to 60, maybe 65, but normally if you're going to put something in place age 55 plus or minus 5 years, you want to have that pretty much nailed down and know what you're going to be doing for that. And there's so many different solutions out there. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all that today. If listeners are interested, email the show, realtalkpersonalfinance@gmail.com, and I might put a show together where I can kind of break down in general the different types of coverages that are out there and how they typically work and things to look out for and how different companies treat things differently. I'd be happy to do that if people are interested. I'm not going to do that here today, but it is something that you need to factor into your overall financial plan. And there will come a point, and this has happened. This has happened for clients before, where people don't get it, or they think it's too expensive, or whatever, and then all of a sudden they change their mind, and they're like, "Yeah, let me take a look at this on second thought," and come to find out they're no longer healthy enough to qualify. So it's something to be mindful of, to be thinking about, but don't wait too long because those costs are typically not going down. At the same time, you don't want to get it too early because you're typically going to be paying for decades longer than you need to be, especially if you're doing like a life pay product where you're paying forever as opposed to like a 10 pay or something else. But anyway, beyond the scope of today, but those are important considerations, and those costs are real. And the number one thing I think that can blow up most people's retirement plans is if they don't have a plan to cover those types of expenses, and they should incur those expenses, which statistically, depending on the source that you're looking at, upwards of 70+% of people are going to need some type of long-term care services at some time in their retirement. The numbers are pretty staggering. And so even if you have something that will partially cover, which is what this particular client did, and not necessarily fully cover those expenses, something is better than nothing. And knowing that you have that protection will reduce the pressure and stress on other areas of your portfolio in terms of drawing down assets and so on. So hopefully that provides a little bit of color and some sort of clarity to the listeners.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think the lesson for today, if we could just kind of wrap this up and summarize for I have 2 points I want to kind of drive home, and that is to those that are not near retirement age and able to start saving early and consistently, whether it's in a bank account, a CD, your retirement plan at your work. Save for that day where life happens and you didn't see it coming. It could be a layoff, it could be a job elimination, it could be the acquisition of a company or the business that you're working for. Maybe it's going to fold and file Chapter 7. I don't know, but start early and be as consistent as you can and learn from those of us that we could have, should have, would have. And then lastly, I'd like to just, the last point that I want to make is, if you are in the workforce and you are working with, if you're like a millennial or Gen X or Gen Y, and you're working with baby boomers, they're not invisible. They're real people with real experience. As I said earlier, experience never gets old. Tap into their knowledge. They are not a liability to your company. They too, I mean, I don't know the last time I've heard an older worker say that their supervisor sat down with them at their performance evaluation and said, hey, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And give them an opportunity to, articulate and express what they'd like to do and how they'd like to advance to get to that next opportunity. I think all too often, and these are real stories, they're out there. I know people that have experienced this. Companies see the older worker as a liability, not an investment, and it should be the opposite. So remember, we're not invisible. We have experience, and we have skills that you cannot buy today with AI or even the younger generation. So that's all. I just think we need to be more sensitive to that. Age bias is real, and it's prevalent right now. And so for those of you that are maybe unemployed right now and maybe over 50 or 60, even 70, and you want to continue working, don't settle. Don't settle for something that doesn't meet your expectation or make you happy. And I know for some of us that's hard because we have to pay the bills, and maybe we do have to be an Uber driver or a Lyft driver. Nothing wrong with that. Do what you got to do, but just keep the faith. And that's it.
All right. Well, thank you for coming back on the show. This will be released sometime probably in early 2026. And we appreciate it. We appreciate you being premium.
Premium.
Congratulations on I think you were one of the $25 Amazon e-gift card winners this December. Were you not?
Yes, thank you. That was a great surprise.
You're welcome. We're happy to do it and give back. So thanks again for coming on the show. And we will see everybody in the next episode.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Thank you for checking out. I gotta do that again.
You don't have that recorded? You should have that
I could, but I like to do it every time at the beginning of the episode. All right. Now I'm laughing. God, there's more for me to edit later. Okay.